Hello and welcome to Cover, our regular review of sporting books, where I give you my opinion, my personal opinion of what's on the bookshelves at the moment. If you've got a book you'd like to add to some of the fine tomes behind me, we'd love to hear from you. There's the email address. It is sean.everett@supersport.com. Let's crack on with today's book, and it is this one, The Fireside Springbok, written and self-published by Mike Greenaway, available at leading bookstores and at burbleonline.co.za, retailing at 650 Rand. And if you buy it from Burble Online, then delivery is free. This is a compendium of stories on Springbok players and the playing history of the most famous brand in rugby. Mike Greenaway has been the rugby writer of the Mercury newspaper in Durban for almost 30 years, and during that time he's reported principally on the Sharks and the Springboks with a fine eye for detail and balanced criticism. He wrote Captain in the Cauldron, the biography of John Smith, and he also wrote Heart of the Terriers, a history of the Amanzim Toti Rugby Club, for whom he played with some distinction in the 80s and 90s. Now, before I go on, let me dispense with the normal conflicts of interest. Mike Greenaway is an old friend of mine. We've been on Bok tours together. We've shared the press box at Kings Park through thick and thin. And we also share a love of a scurrilous publication by the name of Viz. Let's dive into the book then, and it's essentially in two parts. The first half is the result of Mike's love of history as it goes back to 1891 and forward to 1990, dealing with a century of hand-picked Springbok stories. We get the extraordinary tale of Bok captain Ferry Heatley fleeing the country in a rowing boat to escape angry creditors. We learn about Bill Payne, who not only ran comrades in his rugby boots, but taught Oki Geffen how to kick in a prisoner of war camp, which led, of course, to Oki winning a series for the Boks in 1949 against the All Blacks. There are features on Bok legends like Benny Osler, Henny Muller and Boy Lowe, and in amongst the combing through of archive material, there are some truly special one-on-one moments. In 2004, Mike interviewed Howard Watt, who was the last man standing from the 1937 Springbok tourists to New Zealand under the captaincy of Philip Nell. Howard died at the ripe old age of 94, and his first-hand memories of the only Bok team to win a series in New Zealand are splendid. Then there's the tale of Pieter Stephanus du Toit VII. I remember commentating on a 19-year-old Peter Steff when he was at the Sharks Academy, and it was Etienne Finn who told me that his grandfather was none other than Piet Speer du Toit, and that piqued my interest because my father-in-law played for England against Piet and spoke of his awesome strength at the scrum. So it was with a sense of wonder that I read Mike's piece about the du Toit family that's been growing grapes on the same Bullet wine farm for 8 generations. The family tradition is that the firstborn son is named Pieter Stephanus du Toit, and you guessed it, the current Bok flanker's firstborn arrived in April 2019, and he is Pieter Stephanus du Toit VIII. Now, I mentioned that this is a book in two parts, and that story really leads me neatly into the second section, which is essentially a collection of stories written by Mike in the last 30 years. Understandably, perhaps there's a KwaZulu-Natal bias in this latter part, but that should not put you off. The Sharks of the 90s, when Mike took over as chief rugby writer at the Mercury, were a once-in-a-lifetime collection of charisma and talent. Think of Henry Honourable, Andre Hubert, James Small, Mark Andrews, Gary Teichmann, all of them Springboks fit to rank with the all-time greats. And think of such legendary characters as Coach Ian McIntosh, John Allen, Butch James, Franz Stein. They're all here. And what makes these stories special is the behind-the-scenes anecdotes only available to a man touring and celebrating or commiserating with the team. There's also a wider view with Mike's first-hand coverage of World Cups from 1995 to 2019, and there's a particularly poignant piece about the late Solly Chibalika, a gifted flanker with the Sharks and Springboks, who inspired Siya Kolisi to take up the game of rugby. Now, before I get on to rating the book, let me talk about the package. It's an A4 hardback, beautifully produced by Pinetown Printers. It's a coffee table book, And Pinetown printers are the same ones who brought us In Your Stride, which was one of my books of the year in 2021, which is the centenary of the Comrades Marathon. The illustrations throughout are truly magnificent, starting with Steve Haig's award-winning crucifixion scene of Franz Mostert winning a ball against the Lions. And then there are the illustrations of the great Dr. Jack, and there's the one on the back cover, which is a real beauty. The overall design and layout by Pencil Advertising should also be commended. And now, here's the point. This book is self-published because none of this country's best-known publishers would take a chance on it. Now, it's hard to be critical because the South African book market is a small and necessarily conservative one. However, now that it's in the shops, I hope a few of those publishers are suitably embarrassed, because I really can't praise this book highly enough. I've spoken about the glory of the packaging, but nothing happens without content, and this is the book's best attribute. I've spoken about the perils of self-publishing before, but perhaps because he remembers the sub-editors breathing down his neck in the days of hot metal, Mike has produced something truly rare, a book that is as well edited as it is well written. It deserves to be a bestseller, and if you have rugby-loving friends and relatives and you're looking for a Christmas present that will make them smile, then look no further. For only the second time in 2023, 10 out of 10. And let me finish with a story from the book, and this is from the chapter on Howard Watt. And Mike is trying to talk rugby in the 1937 tour, but Howard wants to talk cricket. What he says is, in 1928, when I was 17, my family emigrated to Chicago, and not long after, a few years after actually, the Australian cricket team toured the USA and Canada. Playing for an Illinois 11, Howard bowled Don Bradman for 4 in the first innings and for 13 in the second. And before the second match, the Aussie manager asked for a favour. He didn't want me to bowl because they were afraid I would injure Don Bradman. They were on their way home to host Douglas Jardine's England team in what would become known as the infamous Ashes Bodyline Series.